The classic period begins in around 480 BCE when Athens defeats the Persians, and it ends with the death of Alexander the Great. During this period, the Greeks established ideals of beauty that still endure today. Again, in this period, we see a rapid speed of change in art in a very short period of time. And this is because of that competition between city-states and between artists. Greek classical art is based on three general concepts, and they are humanism, rationalism, and idealism. There is a great Greek proverb that is actually carved in the Temple of Apollo that really kind of depicts sort of the zeitgeist or the spirit of the age of this classical period for the Greeks. And it is that man is the measure of all things. Specifically man, specifically the male form. So the Greeks seek the ideal based on the human form, the male form specifically. And they believe the human form portrays the ideas of balance, simplicity, and nothing in excess. Now we talked about humanism a little bit before. You read about it in your book. Remember that the Greeks imagined their gods as being perfect physical human beings, but of course they're flawed as far as personalities and things like that. Now Apollo is the Greek ideal. He is athletic, his mind and body are in balance. There's an image of Apollo here, over on this side. His mind and body are in balance. And remember, Apollo is the god of athletes, musicians, healers, the sun god, and he's the leader of the muses. Greeks valued reason over emotion. So if you recall, we really haven't seen, if you look in your book too, we really haven't seen a lot of emotion depicted in Greek art. Maybe some in that geometric period, but other than that, not really. Even on the dying warrior, we see like kind of a very slight grimace on his face. Let me go back and find him here. He has like a very slight grimace on his face. He really doesn't look like he is struggling between life and death. But if you want to say, okay, he's got like a slight grimace on his face, that's fine because he's actually not a Greek. So he's allowed to be emotional because he's not ideal. The Greeks had a faith in rationality. They believed that logic and reason were the underlying natural processes. All aspects of life, including art, had meaning and pattern, so there was no accidents. So even something that seems like an accident, well, that's what the gods wanted to happen. That was supposed to happen. The Egyptians and the Near Easterners, they approached art by creating it from images from memory. But the Greeks would actually study an actual object forever, and then they would generalize it. So they searched for the universal ideal. They thought to depict the essence of something and then idealize it. So basically, say they're going to do a human figure, like this one. They will go out and look at a bunch of human guys, right? But maybe this guy has the best butt cheeks, and this guy has the best kneecaps, and this guy has the prettiest face. So they're sort of like Frankenstein monster put it together to make this perfect human being, this universal ideal. So they're really big into idealism. Now rationalism can also be found in the arts, especially in the canon of proportions and in the orders of architecture that we kind of briefly talked about a little bit. Humanism and rationalism produced idealism, and this idealism was really that's really what characterizes Greek classical art. So if you're going to use like one word to describe classical Greek art, it would be idealism. Greek art of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE is really the bar that every piece of art has been set against in succeeding generations of artists. Artists and patrons of the Western world measure the quality of art based on these images, really for a long time, until the modern era. And even now in the modern era, we still respond against or respond to this classical ideal of art. Now in the early decades of the 5th century BCE, the Greek city-states' independence had been threatened by the expanding Persian Empire. The Persians kept trying to invade Greece, but they failed. And they keep failing until 480 BCE. Then the Persians enter Greece with a very large army. They destroy many cities, including Athens. The Greeks end up allying together against the Persians, and they're led by Athens and Sparta. By 479 BCE, the Greeks win, and they begin to rebuild the cities. So this is really important because there was a need to build during this period. All the old art had been destroyed. All these old buildings had been destroyed from this earlier period. So the Greeks decide, okay, we're going to rebuild it. But they're not just content to, okay, well, we had this sculpture of, like, say this guy. We had this sculpture. It was a really great sculpture. They're not going to be just content to recreate old art. Instead, they are going to create new art, and they are going to begin to portray the human figure in sculpture and painting with greater accuracy. And I think we can see that here and maybe in an image like this as well. So they're going to be more polished and idealized and less stylized. So one would say that the archaic images, like with the Koros figures, are more stylized, whereas the images from the classical period are going to be more idealized and more naturalistic. During this classical period, one of the things that was established to depict the perfect human form is the canon of proportions. And this was established by Polykleitos. Polykleitos is an artist and theorist and also a sculptor from the 5th century BCE. And he wrote a thesis or a treatise, also that's basically like a book or essay, on his concepts of proportion. So he sought an ideal of the human beauty. He thought that by studying the human appearance closely, he and others could select the attributes that they found most desirable, such as regular facial features, like nice shaped noses, nice shaped chins, perfect hair, that kind of thing. Smooth skin, certain body proportions, of course athletic and muscular, and they combine these into a single ideal of physical perfection. Polykleitos wrote out the rules for idealizing the human form and called it a canon. Now, a canon, it's not like a cannon that you fire. A canon is the Greek word for measure, law, or rule. To illustrate his theory, he created a larger-than-life-size bronze statue of Achilles. Now, neither his rules or his statue actually survives, but his writings were widely discussed in contemporary writings at the time, and in later Roman artists supposedly saw his work and copied it in stone and marble. The canon included a system of ratios based on a basic unit and the length of various body parts. So we're not really sure what the basic unit was. Some scholars think that he used the index finger or maybe the height of the head to determine how many, so basically what he's doing is okay, so the knee needs to be so many index fingers big, or the head needs to be so many index fingers big. So that's kind of what he's establishing. It also established a relationship between body parts. So if the head is this big, then we need to make sure that the knee is only this big. So make sure they're kind of existing in harmony. He also believed that there should be a relationship between the body parts, as in, if this leg is bearing weight, then this leg should be relaxed. And then that should correspond to the way the arms are positioned. So this arm would originally have been holding a spear, and this arm is relaxed. It's creating this kind of X cross balance and harmony. This sculpture here, which is supposedly a copy of Polykleitos' spear bearer, it depicts the contrapposto pose. The contrapposto pose describes the twisted pose resulting from parts of the body set in opposition to each other around a central axis. So that's just what I mean with this kind of like X composition sort of thing. So this is supposedly a copy of Polykleitos' original Achilles. It's a little bit over 6.5 feet tall. The original was made in bronze. This is probably a marble copy. The left leg is bent at the knee with the left foot poised on the ball of the foot, suggesting preceding or succeeding movement. The balance of tension in the body. We just talked about that, how we have kind of that X-composition. His right arm is relaxed and his right leg bears weight, where his left arm holds that spear and his left leg is relaxed. So we're creating this balance. I bring in this slide so that we can see how quickly things changed in Greek art. This is really interesting. So this is 580 BCE, and this is just a little bit over 100 years later, 450 BC. So you can see this, very much reliance on line in the archaic period, very stylized hair. And then we get this kind of overcompensated definition of the abs, then very doughy here, and then this guy, like he's king of the gym or something like that. So it's just a really interesting evolution of figures, and so quickly, they changed so quickly before internet and TV and all that. Remember, just traveling is a big deal, so the fact that these images can change so quickly is actually pretty amazing, pretty impressive. So after the Persians invaded and then the Athenians, kicked them out, Pericles decides to revamp the city of Athens, and mostly the Acropolis. The Acropolis becomes the center of civic and religious life. Athens had originally been a Neolithic city built on a hill, which is what the term Acropolis means. First it was a city, then it was a fortress, then it was a religious sanctuary. As the city grew, the Acropolis became the religious and ceremonial center devoted to Athena, who was the patron and protector of Athens. Now, after the Persians sacked Athens in 480 BCE, the Athenians were devastated, and they vowed to keep the site of the Acropolis in ruins as a memorial. But Pericles, who becomes kind of this leader in Athens, he decides that this is really depressing. He's like, why would we be so depressing and leave this terrible ruins up on our hilltop? So he convinces the Athenians that they need to rebuild the city, and that this project is going to honor the gods, especially Athena, who had helped them defeat the Persians. Pericles really wants to create a visual expression of Athens' values and civic pride. He really wants to produce this glorified city. So he hires his best friend, Phidias, who is a renowned sculptor, to be in charge of the rebuilding of the Acropolis. And so they recruit the most talented artists in the area, and even outside of Athens, the surrounding countryside as well, to contribute to this massive project. The cost, of course, and needed for materials and labor is ridiculous. They need gold and ivory, exotic wood, and some 22,000 tons of marble to be imported. And the marble actually has to be brought in from 10 miles away from mountain quarries. Pericles' opponents criticize him for the money, but he always has the popular support. It actually ends up boosting the economy, and the working class has jobs. The work continues after Pericles' death. The focal point of religious activity and of the Acropolis is going to be the Parthenon. And here are the remains of the Parthenon today. The Parthenon is considered to be the mature classical style. Phidias supervised the whole Acropolis project, and he was in charge of the sculptural program. The Parthenon was completed in 438 BCE, and Phidias and his workshop worked on the decorations until they finished in 432 BCE. The result of the architecture and decoration is a balanced, unified vision. The building works as a stylistic whole. The sculptural decoration on the Parthenon depicts a number of political and ideological themes. 1, the triumph of the democratic Greek city-states over Persia. 2, the preeminence of Athens thanks to the favor of Athena. And 3, the triumph of the enlightened Greek civilization over the barbarianism and chaos, of course representing the Persians and others. All the sculptures here are marble.